self-understanding does interest and excite a number of people. There is a distinct difference, for example, between seeing one's work at a college like this as occupation, a way of earning a living, and seeing it perhaps also as vocation, a calling. The latter is much closer to a particular understanding of what a church college is than the former. So all of us, and there are many faculty and staff here, and I'm very pleased with that, are continually interested in that. But in this particular time, the question of what it means to be a church college is important because many of us are involved in conversations about a new Lutheran church. The presidents of 29 colleges of the new Lutheran church have been meeting once a year for, I think, 4 years now. We always talk about this. We have yet to reach any consensus at all about what church college is, and so there will be significant variety in understanding of what a college and church is, and in understanding how this relationship, whatever it is to be expressed in some sort of concrete form. What I'm arguing is that this is a very relevant topic for faculty, staff, and for all church people, those at least involved in the new Lutheran church. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Holmer with us, and you can read some of this biographical material. I'm pleased to note that some colleagues from Gustavus are here and from St. Olaf. That's interesting. You obviously know Dr. Holmer and or have read his material or heard him speak, and that's why you've come. We have the rare good fortune of having him with us at Augsburg. He's the first distinguished visiting professor. I like the sound of that. He rolls off. And I'm not sure quite how we did this, except I remember one meeting in the Augsburg room next door at lunch when the chairman of the board was there, and Paul said something to the effect that whenever you shake his roots, Minnesota dirt falls out. That was it. And I think, even though he's commuting back and forth, still teaching at the Divinity School, my impression, at least, is that he's also pleased to be here. And we are certainly pleased to have him, and especially to address the topic, the church college.
I got out of the car at Leech Lake some years ago. It was a warm summer day, and it was a little bit damp outside. Lots of mosquitoes, obviously. As we got out of the car, en famille, the whole crew, guinea pig, everything else we were caring for the children. We were accosted by a young man and a member of the Indian tribe. Anyway, this young man was standing there waiting for us as we unpacked. He knew that we were coming. He had something in mind, in his mind, and he wanted to talk to me. Well, we unpacked a little bit, and then I went and spoke to him. And he said to me, so the Indian Bureau, he says, has written us a letter, and he says my dad is supposed to do whatever this letter says to the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington. He says, we don't know what it means. So he took out of his pocket this letter. It had been obviously opened and closed many times. He handed it to me, and most of the letter was kind of perfunctory, except there was one passage in the letter which said that the Indians, too, had to be against the economic exploitation of natural resources. And this young Indian man said, we all got stuck on that. He said, well, what's the meaning of that? Economic exploitation of natural resources. Well, I did try to explain, but that's not my point. My point is that that was a major concept, economic exploitation of natural resources. The Indian father, who was the titular head of the tribe, could neither read nor write. He obviously couldn't read even the words, economic exploitation of natural resources. The son, who could read and write, could read the words, but he didn't get the concept. So he didn't understand the use of the word. Economic exploitation of natural resources. If you ask who is educated by a higher education, you'd have to ask the question, who understands concepts? Because higher education has to do also with the training in concepts of all sorts. Now, if you ask, what about Christianity and the colleges? Well, one of the standing occasions for Christian intellectualism, one of the long and perpetual cases for Christians being organized in the intellectual endeavor, is that a good part of the faith, the Christian faith, Lutheran faith, faith that you get through grace through the Lord Jesus Christ, even that is conceptual. If you don't get the concepts, you miss a good part of it. For example, everybody knows the word grace, but many do not understand the concept, the Christian concept of grace. Everybody understands the word make and maybe create. Well, they all can read the word. Everybody in most rooms like this would surely be acquainted with the word. But the distinctive case for Christian intellectualism is that that word grace is also exercised in an extremely odd, peculiar fashion by Christians. Grace of God is both like and yet deeply unlike any grace that you otherwise know. And unless you know the difference, you wallow only in the similarities, you miss the niceties of the Christian faith. Now, that doesn't say that the Christian gospel is not available for those who are unintellectual. Because God's grace comes to people in all kinds of ways other than through understanding. But it is to say that no one has to be faulted, Christianly speaking, if he or she is an intellectual. And the extraordinary thing about that Christian gospel is that it fits all human natures, including the natures of the intellectuals. And it fits it by many of the teachings of the Christian gospel also being couched in conceptual terms. Hence, Christianity is appropriate, an ingredient in something we call higher education, not just elementary education, or not just high school education, but higher education, in which the education becomes distinctively conceptual. I've thought long and hard about the issues of service in Christian colleges. I haven't escaped a certain kind of crisis on that subject. And I must admit to some unresolved and unrequited issues in my own life on that score. But it does seem to me, in the light of what I've already said, there are two loci for considering education and the Christian college. In the past couple of weeks, I've been reading things about the Blagan family and about Augsburg and its origins. There's one obvious reason why Christian colleges have come into existence and why some of them persist. Namely, the Christian colleges just took care of an obvious and felt need. There was a felt and obvious need for ministers, for educated, or at least trained, if not always educated, but educated and trained laity. The felt and obvious need was that you had to have personnel who were specialized, let us say for the moment, to serve the church. The church, you see, also becomes an engine in society. It does things for people. It has its own existence. It's one more institution. It needs personnel like medical profession needs personnel. It needs personnel like schools need teachers. There's a reason for Christian colleges, at least in the past, to come into existence, namely to train and provide people who could serve that institution. That has not always proved to be the way in which the Christian colleges have become distinctively inquiring or resolutely intellectual on Christian matters. Because sometimes institutions that have simply created the learned cadre who are going to carry on the business of the institution, colleges like that have often been able to do that cadre service without doing the other job, namely of penetrating more deeply into the conceptual and learned facets of our world. Let me put it another way. There is one locus in which the Christian college has had an easy justification. The Christian college has fulfilled church purposes. And church purposes have been sufficiently various and sufficiently intense to need whatever the Christian colleges could provide. I have been a member of the LCA, and actually Augustana Synod, but anyway, I haven't quite got around to the LCA. But anyway, we were distinguished in the LCA in the eastern part of the United States for having a president of the LCA, whose name I shall not mention, who used to say with great enthusiasm, especially at meetings of Christian educators from the Christian colleges, including LCA colleges, that he saw no reason whatsoever to send his own children to an LCA college. His notion was that the very tasks I've been pointing out to you that Christian colleges would do, provide trained personnel, because that now has been taken care of by seminaries, by other institutions. The Christian college no longer is a needed servant of the churches. Therefore, granted the cultural progress of the day, if that's what you wish to call it, the colleges did not have that direct and immediate need-fulfilling function any longer. He didn't always have the clientele of the church with him when this unnamed president would say these things, but with his erstwhile almost Lutheran papal authority, it sounded like a very impressive thing to have someone say, and someone radical in character. I'm not quite sure of all the issues involved there, but if I were to leave the issue by saying that the only role for the Christian colleges is to provide whatever the church needs, whatever the church wants, I'm not sure that what the church needs and what the church wants is always in the best and the highest Christian interest. So I'll simply have to admit that matter for you, and if you don't admit it, tough on you. Because it strikes me that the church is often, well, its need for personnel and its need for kinds of personnel some of those needs might be created by the existence of the church and not always by the gospel in the church. So therefore, let me turn to the second range of issues about which I feel much more confident, but also much more uncertain. I began by saying Christianity is compatible with the conceptual capacities of human beings. All the sciences nowadays are done in conceptual terms. Almost all the great learning in the world is couched in conceptual terms. And also the Christian faith can be and is conveyed in conceptual terms. Now, when you begin to think about it like that, then something very peculiar becomes apparent. Namely, that the conceptual terms that the Christian faith forces upon you, you become a believer. They're not optional. Forces upon you. Some of those conceptual terms are not in agreement with the teachings of the world, teachings of the rest of the universities, colleges. For example, take the Christian concept. Now, what is a concept again? The Christian concept of the world. That's a very peculiar concept. The dangers of being in the world. That Christian concept of the world is a hard one to understand. It's not the same as the everyday concept world. It's not the same as the concept by which most of us refer, maybe with the lines of the poet. The world is too much with it, getting and spending, we lay waste our power. I'm not sure that the poet had in mind anything like what apostles and those trained by the Christian gospel have in mind when they warn us to beware of the world. When our Lord speaks about the dangers of conforming to the world, the Apostle Paul does, be not conformed. There's a very distinctive teaching. That takes reflection to understand that. You don't understand it just because you repeat the words, because it flows from your mouth. There's something that has to be transformed in people, something deep in them. The whole pattern of their affection has to be reordered. And that's death. That takes an insinuating and acute intelligence to trace that out to what that meaning of that worldliness is. I don't know who does that, whether chemists do it, whether the Department of Religion does it, whether philosophers in the Christian college do it. No, you see, it's too big an issue to be left to any one department. It belongs to everybody. And therefore, training people in a Christian consciousness, which their consciousness as Christians is going to be always on guard, lest they be entrapped in the world, by the world. Well, that takes some discipline. That takes a discipline, a deeply Christian discipline to comprehend that. Well, let me put it another way. Most people use most of the learning of the world. Let me repeat that. Most people use most of the learning of the world that they can command. They use that to create a set of illusions for themselves, to protect themselves from the presence of a living God. I'll say it over again. Most people use most of learning to create a series of illusions to protect themselves from the living God. That's why the use of learning is never dictated by the learning. The use of learning, the Christian use of it, is exceedingly hard. I'll say to you again, in order to make big mistakes in this world, you've got to be very, very smart. Stupid people make little mistakes, but big ones are made by the very bright people. There's no notion in the Christian tradition that a PhD is going to save you from the big mistakes. No, the big mistakes are made by people with PhDs. That's because the big mistakes are illusions of the spirit, notions of self-sufficiency. How many learned people don't think learned are really self-sufficient? 50 million Frenchmen, as once said, can't be wrong. Christianly speaking, you know they can. 220 million Americans can be wrong. Christianity never says the majority are always right. Never says that. No, not the majority, but the symptom. Not the majority vote, but the symptom of the truth. That's why the statement, the articulation of the Christian outlook on the world, not a matter of just garnering miscellaneous truth, packaging it for easy dispensation to the masses of humanity. No, the illusions that most people build up, they build up with the help of their learning. Very little learning in the world penetrates these illusions. Think of the massive illusions in the thought that if you only knew enough, you'd be able to act correctly. Ancient Greece, that was called sophism. The attempt to infer a mode of life from the facts. Therefore, the illusion is created. You just give us more facts. Get a big research project going. Get everybody corralled. Get the outfit all steamed up. Get the learned corps out there doing their job. And then what? Salvation? No. Christian notion is man dies on the cross. There's the hope of the world. The illusion of the rest of the world is that we slaughter our ignorance and we liquidate the ignorance of the countless many. They're being born every day, wonderfully, completely ignorant. We just take care of their ignorance. We'll do things of inestimable benefit. But the benefits are not inestimable. They're estimable, but not inestimable. The inestimable benefits belong to the gospel. The rest of it is a matter of accounting. Put it another way, you see. As if ordinary ways to live are fraught, Christianly speaking now. You don't always hear it in all the churches. But Christianly speaking, work out from the gospel itself. Work out from Luther, who's caught that gospel again. Work out from that gospel. It's as if the world surrounding us can entrap us. Our problem is not to always engage it maximally, but to learn to deny ourselves, pick up a cross, follow him. Most of learning is like an aggrandizement of all of creation. Attempt to show your own sovereignty. Take it all, as much of it in as you can. Well, go ahead and do it. Don't boast about it. Don't put any hope in it. That's why, you see, Christian teaching has to have a polemical fight to it. Has to have a polemical stress. And not just one more additive in the intellectual diet. It doesn't have that polemical stress. Christian teaching doesn't say, woe unto you. It doesn't say that. It becomes just a condiment that's thrown in on top of the intellectual diet everybody already has. Now, if that's all the Christian colleges do, a little Sunday touch to the otherwise business week, then I'd say liquidate them right today. No. Christian intellectuality has to be a distinctive kind of intellectuality. It isn't just more of the same, but now a little bit more on Jesus, apostles, and books, including Bible. No, it isn't just that. Christian intellectuality also has that polemical edge. It has to have that. Now, there's no way to program that and to induce that en masse. There's no way to do that in growth. But it does strike me that a Christian college is a kind of place in which that kind of irony respecting the world, the irony present in the thought that we're all in it, if we're Christians or not of it, that deep, profound kind of Christian irony, someplace that's got to find a voice. And it's got to find a voice, not where only where the non-intellectuals are, and they're everywhere, but also where the intellectuals are. That the intellectuals are often making themselves at home in the world for their intelligence. It'd be odd Christian colleges succeed so well that they make everybody at home in the world, because that would be to fail. As Christians, we're never quite at home in the world. And that's where the polemical side comes. I began by saying there's one way in which Christian colleges can be looked upon just as instruments of the church, doing things of the institution, occasions, and needs. But there's also such a thing as doing this other matter that I noted, namely refining that Christian conceptuality so that there's something to go with the word. Namely, that Christians are those who really live by the grace of God. You see, if you live by the grace of God, there can't be any such thing as a genuine tragedy, because the grace of God is with you in all things. Now, that's a hard saying, because most people's experience adds up to joys succeeded by tragedies, succeeded by joy, ups and downs, ups and downs. Christian intellectuality would teach us that there is no such thing as a genuine tragedy, not if you believe in God. Teach you furthermore, not just as a Bible verse to be repeated, for which you get a gold star, but rather something to live by, namely, that all things work together for those who love God. All things. Now, I find that immensely challenging intellectually. I don't find that supported by Plato. I don't find that footnoted by Aristotle. I find that very rare teaching. I'm surprised that it doesn't engage us with even more enthusiasm than most of us can bring to it. It strikes me as being so different than the rest of the patois of even the intellectual world. Someone said to me, as my mother once did when she asked me years ago, when I told her that I'd gotten a chair, something she was a little interested in that chair business. And she said to me, but, she said, what do you do? And I was hard pressed to say. I'm glad we could divert her before I had to give an answer. What do you do? Now, if you said, what do you do, and you demanded the answer. Well, there's one thing I could say. Oh, I'm teaching philosophy all these years, sometimes here and sometimes there. Kind of religious context, sometimes. But that's one thing. But now, I could give a list of all the things I've taught. I've been slinging it on this subject and that. Yes, impressive, but Christianly speaking, what have you been doing and all of it? And then see, that's not an easy answer to give. What does it amount to Christianly? I don't think the question is altogether inappropriate. The answer is hard to give. That's why I think it might be the case that a distinctive Christian intellectuality might be that I've satisfied the condition under which they really seek God. Because I guess that's the way Christians are supposed to be, homeless in the universe. I'll go back to the church, because sometimes in our churches, church seems to be getting very at home in the world. That's why we've had reformers all through the centuries. Remind us that the task of the church is not to be at home in the world, but learn to win by losing, and gain by dying. When you think about it like that, then the task of being in a Christian college, oh, I know it has certain shortcomings. I know about the pay, the lack of it. I know about things like that. But think of the romance that there is. A genuine, profound romance. It's like a big love story. How humanity is in the grip of God's overweening and overpowering passion. And that romanticism, Christian romanticism, of the newness of life, the oddness of a calling, the strangeness of the whole world around us, it's all wrapped up in something called the gospel. You fed on that, strikes me, to discover a reason why maybe Christian colleges, Christian intellectuality has continued lo these many centuries. Thank you.
One of the most exciting things about the last conversation we had last year was the conversation. And we want to continue that and have you share with each other and then with all of us together some of the ideas you have about the role of the church-related college based on what you heard Dr. Holmer say and the thoughts you've had before. I think we've heard enough to guide that conversation. I would just like to remind us of a couple of the things we heard and sort of focus that discussion. One question that rises in my mind is whether there is in fact a difference between the way one educates to understand concepts and the way one educates to understand Christian concepts. Is it one kind of education, or is there more than one kind of education? And
heard Dr. Holmer say that someplace Christian irony must find a voice. And I wonder where that place is in the church-related college. Is it in the classroom? Is it only in the religion classroom? Is it in the environment? Is it everywhere? Where does that Christian irony find a voice? And then finally, as perhaps a little memory device to pick up on what Dave Wold said, 3 words that start with P: program, purpose, and people. How are those things different? How should they be different? How might they be different at a church-related college based on the ideas we heard tonight? On the name tag that you have, there is a number, which is the indication of the group we'll ask you to be in. We would like you to talk about some of the ideas that flow from what you heard tonight. We'd ask someone in the group to write some of those things down so that we can collect them and reproduce them and remember what was said here tonight in some solid form. We'll come back here after about a half hour and share some of those ideas in this larger group. If you have a 1 or a 2 on your name tag, you should stay in this room and make 2 groups. If you have a 3 or a 4, you will meet in the first part of the large commons area on your right. As you leave this hallway here, there is a separate area on the right. 3 and 4 will meet there, and groups 5, 6, 7, and 8 will meet in the large commons area straight ahead of you as you leave this area. So I'll ask you to break up into groups and come back here in about a half hour. We'll remind you when that's up and ask someone to take some notes on what was said in the group. We're trying to keep our commitment, I think we made to the end about 9 o'clock. But we found it very valuable last time to just have some opportunity at the end to get back together and share some of the ideas that came up in the individual groups. Many of them we found last time went in different directions, and it was helpful to know what some of the ideas were that came from the different groups. So for about 15 minutes, I would ask you to share with us as a large group some of the ideas that came out of your group. I won't do it in any particular form or order. Just ask you to share some of the things you found most interesting in the groups that you talked about, some of the ideas that came up in there. So I'm just going to open it up and let you do the talking. One brave volunteer to start this.
You know Ruth back there? Ruth, way back there?
Larry.
Oh, that's Larry.
I guess one question that our group wrestled with was really twofold. One, whether Dr. Holmer's discussion contained within it an implicit anti-intellectualism, and secondly, whether Christian faith itself contained a sort of anti-intellectual component to it. We wrestled with that because we didn't like that suggestion, I think, but in one sense we weren't sure we could deny it completely, that there's some tension between the stance of Christian faith and the intellectual stance.
For us, they came out in the physical realm, in the view of the world, where on the one hand, we see the Christian faith taking the world, the Lutheran tradition taking the world physically very seriously, and yet recognizing validity in Dr. Holmer's statement that there is no tragedy through the Christian view. There are no tragic incidents in life. So again, I think as Larry said, it develops a tension there. One side taking the world versus life, and at the same time, no such thing as a tragedy.
Other things along that same line.
Now, one thing that occurred to us is that the importance as concepts are as a way of understanding the world in science, there is a sense in which Christianity can be understood not in conceptual terms, but as a way of relating to the world, a way of intending the world, which to us seems to be not a conceptual matter at all, but a matter of relationships, values, and the general structure of the way one orders one's life in the world.
So there's tension between concepts and relationships.
Not intention exactly, but A distinction.
Yes, I think that tension. I don't know. Other things that came up that struck you?
We ended up where Paul began and ended, like by saying, asking the question, what does the church need or want from a college like this, or a college different? And we thought perhaps the answer for today was troublemakers. And in the good sense of the word troublemakers, and when Paul said that he was that, he was sending people out who were not of the world or something like that, who were thinking about the kinds of questions people ask. You can be a troublemaker when you're a preacher, teacher, or troublemakers to all kinds.
Do you distinguish between what the church needs and wants? It might need one thing and not want, no. It might need troublemakers in that sense, but not want them. I haven't heard any great passion for critiques. The people I know, all either in education or in church.
We treated it as a question form by saying our Christian higher education institution, the church is higher education. That's a good, that's true, yeah.
Are the
Are the institutions, our Christian institutions, are learning. The church is in higher education.
you don't have an answer?
Yes, I do say it.
The Chuck knows, I don't know if everybody agrees with him.
That's what he says.
Very clear to me.
I point out, I've heard Dr. Holmer argue the opposite too, that Christianity is not only a conceptual matter, but there are other ways that the gospel comes through liturgy and song and prayer and Bible study. I mean, I've heard him argue the other way too, and they're not mutually exclusive.
Did you talk about the place of those things in the college?
To some degree, yes.
So they have their place besides the conceptualizing those other things we have to learn.
Worship.
Other exciting ideas. Dr. Holman, do you want to respond to anything you've heard?
Sure, there are two senses of the word world. One use of the word world is to describe the natural given environment in which all of us find ourselves. The second use of the word world is to talk about the artificial secondary environment that culture and learning and human accumulations create. And I think it's the case that Christians find it extremely plausible to be to study the natural given environment, and to we all have to acknowledge a debt to that. We're dependent upon that in all kinds of ways. But whether we're supposed to be our relationship to the artificial secondary environment is the world in that sense is somewhat different. I don't know why that seems to me relevant to something. That's not somebody raised the question. I have to do with it. I can't remember what the question was. But another issue that was you answered the question you raised about whether the anti-intellectual is present. Yes, it's present both in the churches and in the gospel itself. It's as if Christians have to bracket their intellectualism. Think about it differently. It isn't as if the intellectualism defines intimately the nature of the real. Not a pretension of the intellectualism is those who define the real. But Christianly speaking, talk about God and so on. To meet God in a peculiar variety of ways. The Christian God is such that the Christian God, under some circumstances, is closer to some people than he is to others. And why? Because the Christian God is the kind of God that can live within us in a peculiar way. You will his will, and love with his love. That God lives in you.
in that sense, some people are closer to God than others. They will His will. And then the Christian God is the kind of God that is not equidistant from everybody. And then there's another sense in which God is equally close to everyone. But, so God is accessible. Now, that accessibility is dependent upon is totally dependent upon our command of Christian concepts. Well, if you're going to be a public gabber, you better have a concept, you know? And most of us are professional gabbers. We talk, gab away, earn our living by gabbing. Then you gotta have the concept, for goodness sake. Otherwise, it's just mush. The talk is pointless because having a conceptual grip and a conceptual definition to what you say means that other people find your remarks legible or readable. Otherwise, you don't. The language is noise. So that's why we're dependent on the conceptuality. If we all shut up and do anything and talk so much, we wouldn't be so conceptually dependent. But now Christianity also is promulgated by words from your mouth. Furthermore, one of the ways to be a Christian is to have words of confession on your lips and a song in your heart. Both. And confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus Christ, and that's one of the ways to be a Christian. Not the only way, but it is a way to be a Christian. So you better have some words on your lips. You got them anyway, so you better have the Christian words on your lips. And it isn't bad to have grace, faith, the concept. So you don't muck them up. And a mucked up concept is just the rule of the day. So, hope springs eternal in the human breast, some great poets have fire. This world in that sense is somewhat different. I don't know why that seems to be irrelevant to something. That's a great question. I do with it. I can't remember what the question was. But another issue that was, you answered the question you raised about whether the anti-intellectual is present. Yes, it's present both in the churches and in the gospel itself. It's as if Christians have to bracket their intellectualism. Think about it differently. It isn't as if the intellectualism defines intimately the nature of the real. Not a pretension of the intellectualism. It's the result of define the real. But Christianly speaking, we talk about God. You meet God in a variety of ways. The Christian God is such that the Christian God, under some circumstances, is closer to some people than he is to others. And why? Because the Christian God is the kind of God that can live within us in a peculiar way. You will his will, and love with his love. That God lives in you. In that sense, some people are closer to God than others. They will his will. And then the Christian God is the kind of God that is not equidistant from everybody. And then there's another sense in which God is equally close to everyone. But, so God is accessible. Now, that accessibility is dependent upon it is totally dependent upon our command of Christian concepts. Well, if you're going to be a public gabber, you better have a concept, you know? And most of us are professional gabbers. We talk, gab away, earn our living by gabbing. Then you gotta have the concept, for goodness sake. Otherwise, it's just mush. The talk is pointless because having a conceptual grip and a conceptual definition to what you say means that other people find your remarks sort of legible or readable. Otherwise, you don't. The language is noise. So that's why we're dependent on the conceptuality. If we all shut up and do anything and talk so much, we wouldn't be so conceptually dependent. But now Christianity also
is promulgated by words from your mouth. Furthermore, one of the ways to be a Christian is to have words of confession on your lips and a song in your heart. Both. And confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus Christ, and that's one of the ways to be a Christian. Not the only way, but this is a way to be a Christian. So you better have some words on your lips. You got them anyway, so you better have the Christian words on your lips. And it isn't bad to have grace. The concept. So you don't muck them up. Now, mucked up concepts is just the rule of the day. So, hope springs eternal in the human breast. Some great poets said that. But that isn't Christian hope. Hope that springs eternal in the human breast. That's something else. But now to get clear what the hope is in Christ Jesus over against the hope that keeps springing eternal in the human breast. And I get that from the fact that you eat eggs every morning. Keep up your vitality, eat nuts whole wheat or something. Maybe that kind of hope. That kind of hope that springs eternal in the human breast. You don't need Jesus dying on the cross. Well, I don't know. I seem to be wandering, so I think that's
Being a little mucked up. I'd like to thank you all for your words and for being with us this evening. I'll ask those of you who took notes to pass them on to me so that we can keep those and reproduce them. We invite you to be back with us next year when we hope to do this again. Thank you.